We wanted to follow up on an interview we did last month with a local catering company. Robert Patterson is owner of Special Ops Events. He contracted with the Yorktown to organize the annual Yorktown Countdown, a New Year's Eve bash that ended up getting postponed. He joins us now. Robert, thank you so much for coming back. First, it sounds like you were completely blindsided by the decision to cancel this event. But before we get into the why it was postponed. How does a New Year's Eve party get postponed? Postponed to when?
Yeah, that was the question that I was asking was, we've gone through a year where all the holidays got canceled. So I was a little confused just as to how New Year's was going to get postponed because, it's going to be another year till it comes around.
Right. So it coming as a shock to you, it almost happened in the 11th hour. Why did Patriots Point Development Authority Board vote to essentially cancel this event at the last minute?
I still don't know the whys. I have a feeling that there were some local citizens that did not agree the fact that we were doing the event despite us having all the approvals from all the authorities we needed to. So my best guess would be they got some complaints and decided that they were going to make the executive decision to cancel the event. I was not part of the conversation at any point, so I don't know what the particulars were.
Yeah, we're going to be hearing from the other side in a few minutes, but you must have spent a lot of money and you sold tickets. You were sold out, and when I say sold out, according to the state's COVID-19 guidelines. Correct?
Yes, ma'am. We were sold out. We had already invested all the money that needed to be invested to put on an event. Because as you know, it was taking us about 2 days to load in everything. We had just completed the load in on the ship. All of the vendors had been paid. They had been scheduled for weeks out. And so, yeah, everything was scheduled. Everything was paid. Everything was loaded in. We were ready to go.
Now, when we spoke last month, it sounded like you were quite excited and relieved that you had an event such as this event to look forward to.
That was our big end of the year party. And this was a party that was smack dab in the middle of the winter season for myself and a lot of companies that we partner with for this. This was the little shot in the arm that got us through to Seaweek.
Okay, so Robert, we heard that you were really excited and relieved that this event was going to go on. At the time that you signed the contract, what date was that? When was everything finalized?
We actually finalized and executed the contract on December 17th. So it was just a couple of weeks before the event was supposed to take place. So we were in full understanding that we were ready to go. And that was the last piece of the puzzle.
How many people bought tickets?
We sold out at 1,000 people for the event. And of those 1,000, 300 had bought tickets for the pre-event dinner. So it was a complete sellout.
A complete sellout. Okay, so at the time, and you make the argument that really nothing has changed per COVID guidelines in order to have a safe gathering. Now, maybe you can explain to people where the gathering was going to take place. I know that there were fireworks also scheduled, which people just in the area can look forward to watching. But part of the ship, it is outside. It's up on the flight deck. Would it have been risky to have people dining inside? Would it have been any different than, say, a restaurant?
No, ma'am. So you have to remember, we rented the entire ship. So you can imagine the aircraft carrier and having access to all of it. So there was a certain element to it that was on the flight deck that was tented, but it was still open air. People had access to the flight deck in itself to be able to walk around, and then the entire hangar bay. And if you've ever been on an aircraft carrier, you know the hangar bay is huge. So folks could spread out and go around. There's no different, probably even more space than there would be at a typical bar or club or some of the other smaller venues that did New Year's events.
Okay, now this is a place to take a break. So when we come back, I want to know what the dollar amount was that was invested in this event, what you stand to lose, and if the Yorktown has reached out on how to make you whole again. So we're going to do that after the commercial. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. We've been chatting with Robert Patterson. He's owner of Special Ops Event. They were going to put on the Yorktown Countdown New Year's Eve bash, and you were excited about it the last time we spoke. At the very last minute, the Patriots Point board decided to cancel it, much to your surprise. You said you were not in on that meeting, but by that point, you had spent an awful lot of money. Tickets were sold out. How much money have you put out that you stand to lose?
Yes, ma'am. Right now, we're somewhere in the neighborhood of $150,000 to $200,000. There was a ton of marketing. There was all the vendors being paid. There was everything that you can imagine that goes on to put into an event. Even the venue itself, we had paid Patriots Point for the venue, and so we stand to lose anywhere between $150,000 and $200,000. We've been mitigating our losses, trying to get vendors to find ways that they could credit us some, and they've been great about looking at it, but everything was already done. So there's not a lot of savings there when you cancel 24 hours before.
How about tickets? Did you have to give refunds back to customers who bought tickets to the event?
Well, yes, ma'am. Absolutely. We're going to have to refund. We've been communicating with them. We're trying to maneuver through the timing and when exactly we're going to be able to do that. But we absolutely will have to 100% refund everyone that came for their tickets. But there are a lot of people that they don't know how they're going to get refunded for the flights here, for the hotel rooms, for the dresses, for everything else that they spent on it. But we're going to do our best to try to help them get refunded everything they deserve.
So this is not just going to get translated into a party in a couple of months or something like that. It's just postponed, basically means canceled. So at this point, has Patriots Point reached out to you with any remedy on how to make you whole again?
No, ma'am. I've not heard from anyone from Patriots Point regarding the event, other than when the executive director walked up to me while we were in the middle of setup saying that it was canceled or postponed. I've not heard from anyone from Patriots Point.
And what is your next steps here? What do you plan on doing?
I mean, obviously, we have to be made whole again. And this is something that, I've obviously reached out to our attorneys to see what is fair. We are working through that diligently right now. As a small businessman, we can't sustain a loss like this, especially after the year 2020 has been. I'm a Marine. I'm a veteran. I'm a fighter, and so I'm not going to take this sitting down. We're going to fight for what we think is right, and we're going to fight for those folks that came here, bought tickets, and only to have their plans canceled 24 hours in advance. So that's where we are now.
Robert, I want to thank you so much for joining us. And, we're so sorry. I'd like to wish you a happy new year. I'm hoping that things get better from here on out. But we'd like to stay in touch with you and to hear any developments that happen with this situation.
Yes, ma'am. Thank y'all for giving me the opportunity to keep everybody informed on exactly what happened. And we look forward to a brighter year this year.
Thank you so much. We talk to Patriots Point after this. Don't go anywhere. Joining us with the other side is Chris Huff, Public Information Officer for Patriots Point Naval and Maritime Museum, which of course includes the Yorktown, where the Yorktown Countdown was going to be held until a last-minute vote to postpone festivities. Now, Chris, we've worked together for several years now on several stories, a lot of segments, so I'm going to try not to shoot the messenger, but this decision by your board is not just an unpopular one to cancel the Yorktown Countdown, but it didn't make a whole lot of sense and has put a local caterer in a financial bind. Can you explain, first of all, how do you postpone a New Year's Eve event?
Well, first, Leyla, you said it was unpopular. It's only unpopular with a handful of people that have purchased those tickets, maybe 1,000 people. And yeah, certainly they would like to have their New Year's Eve party. And it's unfortunate that it went the way that it did. But the fact is that there are rising COVID cases, and that had to be taken into account. And it's important to look at the health measures and what happens to people when they get COVID. The probability of testing positive has increased. There's more people with COVID. And all of those health safety advocates and scientists and doctors, they're standing up and saying you shouldn't have that event. And that's what our board took into account when they made that decision.
Now, Robert Patterson, he said that everything was finalized back on December 17. And at that point, things with COVID were more or less status quo. So there was always discussion by health experts saying that, best practice is to stay at home for New Year's Eve, don't go out for the holidays, because there would inevitably be a spike. So it's not like health experts weren't talking about it back on December 17th. So knowing that there was some risk of COVID being spread through events, Patriots Point still agreed to hold this event. So why last minute?
I don't think it matters when the decision makes. I'm absolutely positive that Robert Patterson's upset, and he has absolutely every right to be. But 1,000 people on the USS Yorktown on New Year's Eve just wasn't a responsible decision to have. And when that decision was made, was a problem for Robert Patterson, but it saved a lot of people from a possible exposure. And our board, they met, they talked to medical professionals, the community came out. We talked to people on both sides. What do we risk here? What are the health precautions? What are the things that we can do? And ultimately, they made a responsible decision not to allow that on the ship. And it's a private event, but it's on a public venue. And so that's where that decision was made. But certainly people are going to be unhappy that the event was canceled. If I was going to that event and I was one of those people, I'd be unhappy too.
So how do you explain having a pay what you can event at the Yorktown?
Leyla, that's a much different event. We're talking 1,000 people in the Yorktown drinking alcohol with their masks off, having DJs and music, where a pay what you can weekend is thanking families for what they do all year and socially distancing selling tickets and having masks when they go through a museum that's 1 million square feet. The New Year's Eve event was on 2 decks and inside of a tent. Much different event.
Now, I know, having been on the Yorktown before, taking a tour through the Yorktown, while yes, there are some open spaces, there are lots of tight spaces that you navigate through, that you negotiate through, and there are people around. So from what Robert has told us, of course, I haven't been there, so I haven't seen what he has explained, but he said that there were even not just people coming to the Yorktown not wearing a mask, but there are also people working on the Yorktown not wearing a mask. So how do you know that everyone is being safe about it?
I'm sure Robert's upset about it, but you just said you haven't been here to see it. And so you're taking his word from...
I'm not. This is what I'm trying to ask you, Chris. So if you can clarify what he said, I'm just simply...
Yeah, we have a mask mandate here. The state has a mask mandate. Our employees have to wear masks. We have closed off areas of the ship. The Apollo 8 space capsule can't go in that. The submarine Clamagore, you can't go into that. There's places in the Vietnam experience where there's bunkers. You can't go into that. You can't go into the USS Lafitte gun mount. That is one of our most popular exhibits in the entire museum. You can't go in it because you can't socially distance.
Okay, maybe you can also explain this for us. So what Robert had told us is that he was asked to make a payment an hour and a half before the board voted to postpone. Why? Is this true? And why would he be asked to make a payment if it was going to get postponed an hour and a half later?
Business was business as usual for that event. We were loading in. It takes a long time to do that. And until our board met, our board hadn't met before that. So there was no decision made. So everything was moving like the event was going to happen that night. Nobody was stopping the event until the board met and decided.
Okay, this is a good place to take a break. When we come back, I want to ask how Robert, if Robert, can be made whole after all of this, what your ongoing relationship with his event company is going to be like from here on out. We're going to talk about that. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. We've been chatting with Chris Huff. He is with Patriots Point Maritime Museum, and we've been talking about the Yorktown Countdown event that was canceled at the last minute, which certainly, as you can understand, has made a local caterer and event planner quite upset because he invested a lot of money. He sold out tickets to the event. So when that got canceled, whatever was spent was essentially lost. But Chris, how do you make someone that you have an ongoing business relationship with, because he does he has a snack bar at the Yorktown. He also runs the drive-in events at the Yorktown. So you have an ongoing relationship with him. How does Patriots Point manage to make him whole? Can they do that? Will they do that?
That his business makes money is not a charity case where he's doing that to make us money. It's a mutually beneficial relationship, and making yourself whole. I don't know where all that'll go. I don't know what kind of questions he's asked you before. I didn't see that interview. Certainly haven't spoken to him, but that's something that we'll come together and discuss in the next couple of weeks. I mean, it's only January 5th right now. I don't know how we'll discuss that in the future, but I'm certainly it'll be discussed. It's not that we're turning our backs never to talk to him again. We'll talk to him again. But I think that it's important. Listen, we're in the middle of a pandemic. There are people that are sick out there. A decision was made, and I know it's upsetting, but to put business before a medical decision, no matter when the decision made, is irresponsible. And at the end of the day, our board took in the advice from medical professionals, from the local community, from the town of Mount Pleasant, from our board, and then discussed it and made a decision. And that's all there is to it.
Yeah, but with COVID rates fluctuating all leading up to this point, was there never a time where the board thought maybe we should meet now rather than just hours before the event is to take place to decide whether or not it's going to be canceled? And what was the impetus? What was the catalyst for making that last minute decision?
The catalyst was pure and simple. Was it responsible to have 1,000 people together on the Yorktown to celebrate New Year's Eve, where there's probability that there's going to be masks taken off and state employees put at risk? And I think that, I've learned long ago not to put myself into the board's shoe and say whether or not what they were thinking. I wasn't in their minds, but they were given advice and they acted on that advice in the most professional manner that they could. And, you have an argument. You could say, oh, why wasn't this discussed? But we're in the middle of a pandemic. We haven't done this before. Things have changed. The probability, the rate that people are testing positive has changed drastically in the last 2 or 3 months. In fact, in the paper yesterday, it's upwards of 30%. That certainly wasn't the case in early December. And so, pick and choose what you want to look at or say or have an argument. But we have 1,000 people in a business, or we have a super spreader event. It's a hard, tough decision to make, but our board took all the medical professional and the advice that they got and made a solid decision.
I guess people have a difficult time reconciling the idea that an event that's held on an aircraft carrier is canceled, whereas people can still come and dine inside of a restaurant. So
that's not ours to discuss. And, Leyla, quite honestly, if we had that event, we'd be doing the same interview with you, except you'd be questioning me of why did you allow an event where 1,000 people are on the ship? There's no doubt in my mind. We already were getting questions about that. So, we're talking about this today, but quite frankly, we could be talking about why are 20 people in the hospital suffering from COVID cases, and they may never see their families again. I'd much rather be talking about this than that.
And does this mean that Patriots Point, the Yorktown, is going to be canceling events from here on out until further notice?
This was 1,000 people on the
How many people come and visit the Yorktown just for a tour?
And they aren't serving alcohol, or they're here with 12 people and they want their family together. Those kind of things, we're going to look at every single event we do. But let's be honest, we don't do 1,000 people events every day.
Let me just ask you one more question. How many people are allowed on the Yorktown at one time just for a tour?
Just for a tour? Our entire museum is a self-guided tour. So you could say however many people, but we also sell a guided captain's tour that is 12 people to 15 people.
No, but what I'm saying is how many people are allowed on the ship at one time? I imagine that you count how many people are allowed on the ship. So how many people are allowed on the ship at one time?
We have permission from the state to have, I believe it is 250 people on the ship at one time.
250 people. So no more than 250 people at one time to take a tour that are allowed to be on the ship.
I have to, the event policy and the daily visitors are different. I have to look. I'll get back to you and send you an email so that you have confirmed and you can put it in your end of the interview. But I don't want to say and guess that number and be incorrect, so I'll get it to you.
All right, Chris. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
We're back after this.